Welcome into Pressbox Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles of Pressbox and PressBoxOnline.com. And with me is an old friend of mine, and I'm not talking about his age, just the fact we've known each other probably going on over 30 years. John Eisenberg, the very fine author and sports writer for many, many years with the Baltimore Sun, with I think it was Comcast at one time, and then with BaltimoreRavens.com. And John, you've left BaltimoreRavens.com some time ago, and you've been working on a book. And that book I'm going to hold up. It's called Rocket Men. First question out of the gate. I'm not going to blow smoke on our audience or shine them along. I've not read the book. I've read a little bit of it. But this looks like it's researched way more than any other book you've ever written.
Well,
don't let the dog bother you.
Yes. Yes, this book was 3 years in the making.
Wow.
It was, I knew, and honestly, probably going back 5 years, when I thought that black quarterbacks, really when Lamar landed in Baltimore, I found it so interesting, the stuff that he went through really early, actually before he was with the Ravens. When he had a scout at the combine say, "You're going to run the 40 because if you have fast time, we'll make you a receiver. We think you'd be good." And we're almost 100 years into the history of the NFL at that point. And here's a great college quarterback, black quarterback, still being told that it'd be a good idea if he changed positions. And of course he didn't, and then he didn't even run.
They wouldn't have told Dan Marino or somebody like that,
No. So, and of course, there's many decades of great black quarterbacks having to change positions, and Lamar barely gets drafted in the first round by the Ravens, and he's MVP in the league in his second year. So I thought, this is a big subject. What's going on with from a racial perspective at this position for a long time, and it's a big canvas. And I thought, it's really just interesting to me. So I did what I do. I've spent 3 years on it, interviewed tons of people, tons of research, as you alluded to, and just pleased to be able to give it to the public and see what happens.
So in my mind, I would have thought back like, wow, this is like a story in the making of like the last 35 to 40 years, kind of since Shaq Harris and Marlon Briscoe arrived, and Junior Joe. What was Joe Gilliam's nickname? Jefferson Street Joe Gilliam.
Right.
Since they arrived, but this story goes back a lot longer and really has its threads in the racial issues that have plagued our country.
It does. I take the research in this all the way back really to the formation of the NFL. In 1920, the first year the league, when the year the league was formed, the MVP in the league would have been was Fritz Pollard. They didn't have an award. If they had, he would have won it. A little scatback from Brown, played at Brown, and he was from Chicago originally. And he, a couple years later, they were running single wing offenses so through the tailback. But a couple years later, he lines up a quarterback. It's the first instance of a black quarterback in the NFL, 1923. It's for several more years there were black players in the NFL, and then pretty much the NFL went all white. When George Preston Marshall bought the then Redskins, and he was just a son of Dixie and an outright one of the great racists in the history of American sports, and the NFL went all white through World War II. And the league doesn't like to talk about that, but it happened.
The Redskins in particular, Bobby Mitchell, am I right, was the first African-American to play for the Redskins. And that was like in 62 or something like that?
1960s. They went through the 50s. What happened was the league reintegrated, and all these teams slowly but surely started to have black players. The Redskins were the holdout. And it was a big problem for them, really set them back. But this is a period of time when pro football is evolving, becoming very glamorous, and offenses are becoming sophisticated, and the quarterbacks are at the center of it all. It's very complex, and the owners and coaches and general managers were all white, and they said we cannot put this offense in the hands of a black man. Plain and simple, it was a racist ideology, and we don't know whether they're smart enough, whether they'll work hard enough, whether white players will respond to them. Tons of sort of things, thoughts that could not be disproven on the field because no one was getting a chance. So that lasted into the 70s, really, or even 80s. There were just a trickle of guys that got a chance. You mentioned Shaq Harris with the LA Rams, later worked for the Ravens. Of course, Doug Williams, Marlon Briscoe, Warren Moon. So I write a lot about these
Randall
pioneers.
Cunningham. Yeah.
Yeah, Randall Cunningham. So it took decades for this ideology to be disproven, and many, many years of knocking on the door. And in the meantime, a lot of guys' hopes and dreams were dashed. It's really a sad tale. Generations of guys that didn't get a chance that, were they coming out today, would probably be first-round draft picks.
I know the book is about football and in particular quarterbacks, but when you think of Major League Baseball and breaking the color barrier in 1947, and I don't think the Boston Red Sox had an African American player till 58 or 59, and I think it was Pumpsy Green. But when you have the big picture of sports, were leagues and teams willing to integrate because it was the right thing to do, or because some people said the talent that these guys have is so beyond the issue?
I think more the latter, to be honest with you. I don't think they were really concerned. I mean, it's really not fair. I'll be honest, Stan, and dealing with this subject, I'm very hesitant to paint anything with a swipe with a big, broad brush. Plus,
Yep.
there's a range of feelings, how people felt. And it's hard for me to say, oh, they felt this way or that way. Some guys in the NFL in the 50s and 60s probably did care that it was the right thing to do. I think the majority were just trying to win. I mean, George Halas, who basically ran the NFL for 60 years, he was a holdout. There were no blacks on the Bears until the 1950s. And you can trace it to, there was a day they were playing the Cleveland Browns, who were very much ahead of the curve racially, Paul Brown. And so they went up to play Cleveland in the early 50s and got their brains beat in. An all-white team got beaten by the Browns, who had a bunch of black players, Marion Motley and other guys. And I tell you, that's why George Halas integrated the Bears. He was losing. So, I mean, I think it's more of that than anything else.
Yeah, I remember hearing a story for years, legendary coach at Kentucky, Adolph Rupp, who didn't have any black players until he was beaten by Texas Western. They absolutely killed him. And he said, those coloreds are pretty good players. I got to get me a couple of them, like they were property, though. Like, I got to get me a couple of them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely true, that stuff. And shameful in hindsight when you look at it. And what these teams did was they would say, we'll take some black players in the 50s and the 60s. We're going to put them at certain positions. All right. And the positions they didn't want was the so-called thinking positions.
Right.
And that would be offensive center, where there's a lot of responsibility. You have to call signals on the field. Middle linebacker, same thing. You have to call a lot of signals. And the ultimate thinking position, quarterback, where you're in charge of these offenses, increasingly sophisticated offenses in football, pro football. And so there was just a distrust of their ability to do that. And of course, it was just hogwash, but it was embedded in the DNA of the NFL that this was an issue, and it took decades for it to wane.
Let me take a break here for a second and ask a question. What company has the expertise and technology to make your home substantially more energy efficient, comfortable, and even virus-free? That would be AJ Michaels Heating and Air Conditioning in Baltimore and Annapolis at ajmichaels.com. And again, we talk about Superbook, its trusted name in sports books in the country. Superbook Sports. Superbook is the most trusted name in Vegas. Now you can use promo code StanCharles23 to score up to $250 with their first bet bonus. Win or lose, they'll match your first bet up to $250 with the promo code StanCharles23. All one word with no spaces. Visit superbook.com for terms and conditions. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. We continue with John Eisenberg, and I'll mention that you'll hear a little bit about the Costas Inn coming up, but talking to John Eisenberg about his book. And John, who's the publisher of this book?
The publisher is Basic Books, out of New York. It's sort of an old line New York publisher, nonfiction. And they did my last book, The League, about the early days of the NFL, and they're great. It's I mean, there's a lot of there's no problem with distribution or publicity. They do a super job. I'm very fortunate to be in their hands.
All right, and no plans yet for what's next, because your
No plans
books
yet,
really
no.
are they are major works. Your book.
They're major works. Like I said, this one took 3 years, and for half of it, I was still working full time at the Ravens, and so it is quite a lift. And I don't get me wrong, I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate to be in a position to be able to do it. And there's a lot of people that can't get their books in print and or really want an agent. I have an agent. I have a publisher. I've got everything. So I consider myself fortunate. So we'll see. Something will come up. But at this point, I'm just working on getting the word out about this one, and then we'll see what happens.
Are your days of writing columns behind you? You think?
I think so.
On a regular basis.
I hear from people now and then. Would you like to fill in and do this and do that? And I've been saying no, but who knows? Could pop up here or there. But certainly on a steady basis, yes, those days are over.
All right. John Eisenberg did one of my favorite cover stories in the 17-year history of Press Box, The Man of Mystery, Carol Rosenblum. And that must have been about, 12 or 13 years ago, I'm guessing?
Yep. Yeah, it was a great assignment, Stan. I thank you to this day for that.
Did you get paid for it? Did you get paid for it?
Yeah, I did.
In full. That's great. That's great to hear. Hey, getting back to Rocket Men. How important, when I think of all these names, Marlon Briscoe, James Harris, Joe Gilliam, Doug Williams, the first two guys that really come to my mind that established themselves that they could be successful black quarterbacks over the long haul were Warren Moon and Randall Cunningham. How important were they in the history of this evolution?
Well, you can hold up the cover of that book again. You'll notice Warren Moon is on the cover. Yep. That is not by accident. They're in the Houston Oilers jerseys, which, by the way, I don't know if you saw the Tennessee Titans wore their throwback jerseys this year. Houston Oilers jerseys. I think both cities went kind of nuts. I'm not sure you should be doing that.
That was really weird. Very weird.
That was weird. Imagine, if
the Ravens wearing the Colt uniform one day.
Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah.
But anyway, the powder blue. But Warren, who was a big friend of this book, by the way, very helpful, and keeper of the flame on this story, and a great guy, and talked to me numerous times on a number of different aspects of it. And he's absolutely critical. When he signed, of course, if people not familiar with the story, he was undrafted out of the University of Washington, even though he had won the Rose Bowl as a senior, quarterbacked Washington to Rose Bowl victory.
Did he go to the CFL? He went to the CFL.
He went to Canada. Played 6 years for the Edmonton Eskimos, and he won 5 Grey Cups. So completely dominates that league. And finally, at age 27, the NFL decides, well, let's open the doors to this guy. He's a free agent. He comes back and he signs with the Houston Oilers. He is the highest paid player in the league. I mean, it was clear he was pretty good. But when he signed 1984, he's the only black starting quarterback in the NFL. There are no others. Doug Williams had been playing for Tampa before that, but he'd been run out of Tampa, basically. Lowball, the owner there, was just a complete racist and didn't want to pay a black quarterback. And Doug was so disgusted he was out of football or out of the NFL. There were no black starting quarterbacks. So needless to say, Warren Moon comes in 1984, and then Randall Cunningham a year later, 1985, joins the Eagles. And from the get-go, those guys are excellent, super talented, good leaders. They're winners, take their teams to the playoffs. They don't win the Super Bowl, but they're winning quarterbacks. They're elite quarterbacks. And so that's where it begins, really, the whole process of disproving all those things that I mentioned earlier, all that ugly stuff. And so those guys are absolutely essential. They're the first wave, first true wave, along with Doug Williams, who wins the Super Bowl in 1988. Those three, put them together. That's when it started to begin to normalize the idea of a black quarterback.
Mahomes, arguably the best player in the league right now, has been for the last 3 years or so, and Lamar. What have they kind of once and for all put this somewhat behind us, or is it still sort of a quiet discrimination going on against black quarterbacks?
It's changing for sure. Things have changed dramatically, and I'm not sure I could have gotten this book written 10 years ago. It was just too sad. There weren't enough success stories. It's changed. I think certainly Mahomes at the top of the league, and then Lamar coming in after him, and then a bunch of other guys. I mean, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray's the first pick in the draft. This past year, 3 out of the top 4 picks were black quarterbacks. It looks like C.J. Stroud is going to be great in Houston. And so there's a bunch of guys, and there's more coming. And so I do think, but honestly, there's one little moment that tells me we're entering a better phase. And that was a couple weeks ago when the Vikings lost Kirk Cousins for the year. They need a quarterback. They scour the league. Who are we going to get? They trade for Josh Dobbs. They trade for him.
Who had just played against the Ravens the week before.
Played against the Ravens. And I've talked to some people. You look back through NFL history, very seldom has a team traded for a black quarterback in the middle of the year and not a superstar. See, the next threshold was all the great talents are there. What about these sort of journeymen that they've been the prototypical white quarterback for decades? The guys, Jeff Hostetlers of the world that play 10 or 12 years and barely start a game, and they carry a clipboard, but yet, maybe how can we begin to see guys that are just quarterbacks, And so Dobbs, who's come in and played great, by the way, for the Vikings,
won two games for the Vikings,
has shown, and he's a low pick, didn't play much for a couple of years. And with the Steelers, I believe he started out.
And he's the guy, John, excuse me for he's the guy that's like an astrophysicist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The opposite. If they thought he's not smart enough, they thought he's too smart. And and so he's just disproves on a number of levels. It's a story of opportunity, Stan.
Yeah.
The whole story is a story. Give him a chance. Give someone a chance to see what happens. And so Dobbs is Exhibit A, is a guy, that classic guy that never would have gotten a chance as a black quarterback 10 years ago, a fifth-round draft pick. But he's getting a chance, and look. And so it's great, and it's reason to celebrate. However, these guys stand on the shoulders of generations of guys that were just denied by stereotype. And so that's tough for them. But, it's very nice that it's finally changing after all these years.
Where does Colin Kaepernick fit into the whole discussion, the evolution of black quarterback? Because he kind of preceded Mahomes and Lamar by about 5 or 6 years. And then we know what happened to him with the kneeling.
Right.
Where does he fit into this discussion?
I see him fitting in a couple of ways. First way, as a football player, he's in the book. I've got chapters on him. I mean, you could do a whole book on him, obviously, and people have, and movies and all that. But I see Kaepernick. What happened if you go up to, go back to, say, 2010, okay? Not that long ago. Look who the best quarterbacks in the NFL are, all right? Tom Brady's in his prime. If he's not winning the Super Bowl, Peyton Manning is. If they aren't winning the Super Bowl, it's Eli Manning, it's Ben Roethlisberger, it's Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers comes in.
Joe Flacco.
Right. So it's still in play. I mean, Doug Williams won the Super Bowl, but the next 22 winning Super Bowl quarterbacks were white. I think 47 out of the first 48. It's an unbelievable statistic. So it was still a white quarterback's world. But then the generation that changes everything, in my reading of it, Cam Newton, and Kaepernick are drafted in 2011, and then Russell Wilson and Robert Griffin in 2012. All talented, all come in. They play the position differently. They're mobile. And finally, instead of after 90 years of wanting drop back quarterbacks, white quarterbacks, the NFL says, these guys are so good, we're not going to make them conform into what we want. We're going to conform to what they do and let them
We're
throw
going to
on the
build
move.
we're going to build a team around the assets we have in quarterback.
And changing the position. It's like you can move out of the pocket. These run pass option plays, throwing on the move, running with the ball, just anything that a lot of talented black quarterbacks have brought to the position. So if you go from that period 2011-12 to where we are now, look how different the quarterback position is and how they play. Look at Lamar moving around the pocket, even Mahomes, all those guys. So Kaepernick is part of that generation. And as a young player, I thought he was unbelievable. He was one of the best young quarterbacks that I had ever seen.
Yeah.
And so as a player, he's in this primarily as a player. Super intelligent guy, 4.0 student all the way through college, and picked right up in pro football and was succeeding. And then things happen in San Francisco. Jim Harbaugh leaves, and the team starts to go south, and then he starts to wane a little, and then he kneels, and everything changes for him, and his career is taken away from him for that. But as a player, he was a hugely transformative figure. Needless to say, as just a figure in society, he's also a transformative figure.
We'll be back in one moment. I need to tell folks I've got a couple more questions for John Eisenberg about his brand new book. The publisher is Basic Books.
Basic Books.
Rocket Men, the black quarterbacks who revolutionized pro football. But I've got to tell you about the Costas Inn. They've been around for about 53 years. Same location, 4100 North Point Boulevard. Great place to go for steamed crabs, crab cakes, crab soup. But did you know they've got specials every night of the week, Monday through Friday? They're fantastic specials. There's steak specials, there's fish specials, poultry specials. They've got it all there for you at the Costas Inn. If you're still not comfortable going into a restaurant, you can order online at CostasInn.com, CostasInn.com. Phone number 410-477-1975. When you do order online at CostasInn.com, you don't even have to go into the restaurant. Order online, pay for it online. When you pick it up, just let them know you're there and they'll bring it out. Everything is bagged to perfection. Time for a couple more questions with author John Eisenberg. John, I know this has nothing to do with why you wrote this book, but what's going to happen to the white quarterback? In other words, are black quarterbacks so good that now teams are going to say, hey, this is the way we've got to play the position? And will it do away with the future Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre, and those kind of players?
That's a great question, Stan. No one has asked me that, and I don't know. There's no telling. I mean, the best player. What's going to happen going forward is the most talented guy will play. There's plenty of good white quarterbacks out there, and you have to be careful and not stereotype sometimes. Like in the middle of that whole generation of guys was Andrew Luck, right? A white quarterback who came in
from Stanford,
really talented, and his career was short-circuited sort of. The Colts, he got hurt a lot, and I think he didn't want to,
he didn't want to end up. He knew which way it was going.
Yeah, so that's a guy played the same way as those other guys. So you're going to see talents are melding. They want, NFL teams now want, if you've got a white quarterback, I mean, Johnny Manziel, didn't succeed in the NFL, but he plays mobile, moving around, throwing on the run. You're still going to see that. And there's no telling. Certainly the old reflex of the decision-making apparatus in the NFL is still largely white. Coaches and general managers, that needs to change. And I think as long as that is still the case, you're liable in ownership, still white. You're still going to see people they're more comfortable with, but it is changing. There's no telling, but what's really good is the best guy will play now.
John, we know that the head coaches, it hasn't been a flood of black coaches that are head coaches. Offensive coordinators, is it a smattering of them that are African American?
Yeah, there's a smattering of them, and that's a real conduit too. I think it's really what we were talking about earlier about sort of the journey, the black quarterback. The one threshold where we're still having an issue is in the backup quarterback population. Okay, it's a lot of teams seem to want. I mean, the Ravens are an anomaly there. It's great, and some other teams are as well. However, the more black quarterbacks you see carrying those clipboards, that's how you. Doug Williams told me this. He says that's how you become a coach.
Yep.
Okay, you're basically observing and you're learning the pro game. You do that for 10 or 12 years. You come out of football, you're ready to coach. And maybe we'll see more guys like that coming through. The more black quarterbacks there are, the more coaching candidates there'll be. And of course, a lot of these offensive coordinators tend to come through the quarterback position, whether it be in college or the pros or whatever. And so, I hope that changes things a little bit. You definitely need to see more. I mean, the Ravens have been pretty good that way, and they got a guy on the staff now, T. Martin, the receivers coach, who I interviewed for this book, is I think working his way into being a great offensive coordinator candidate one of these days. And
was T a quarterback in college at Tennessee?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And he did what Peyton Manning didn't do at Tennessee. He won. Peyton Manning leaves, and the next year, T. Martin's their quarterback. They win a national championship. Peyton didn't do it, but T. Martin did.
Amazing. John, the coaching question. Deion Sanders, a high-profile player that's coaching at college. He hasn't been a smashing success, win-losses yet, but he really has excited the fan base like no one has in the past 25 years at Colorado. Is that a big sea change in the coaching world for black coaches?
I hope so. I
Yeah.
think it is. Former player, high profile, and a very smart guy. I mean, he came through Baltimore, and he was in the locker room here, and is always an interesting guy to talk to. I think it is a sea. I hope it's a sea change. I mean, not everybody has the megawatt star power of Deion Sanders. That's part of the deal here. But personally, I love seeing it. I mean, college football to me really needs a shakeup.
Yeah.
And to have that sort of old network get shaken up by a guy that's changing some norms, I am totally for it. And of course, a college coach today, listen, you're going to have to be managing that transfer portal and the NILs, and it is a whole different game than what it was 20 years ago when you had to just coach the guys. So, he may be the prototype of what you're looking at.
Last question for you, and I appreciate your time. Lamar Jackson, does he have to win a Super Bowl to really be taken seriously as a great quarterback? We know he's a marvelous athlete, and there are all these glimpses and times where he looks like he's as good as anybody. But does he have to win to be taken more seriously?
I think he does. I do, and I think he's not alone there. There's a lot of quarterbacks that need to win Super Bowls to be taken more. I mean, you can beat Dan Marino never did, and it's clear that he was a great quarterback, but you'd probably count on one hand. I mean, that is an affirmation like no other, and you'll be known as a talented guy that didn't win. That's okay, and signed a big contract. That's, it happens to a lot of guys. It's not the worst fate in the world. But to really join that pantheon of sort of elite guys, and he desperately wants to be in that list. Sure, absolutely. You have to win a Super Bowl instead of just piling up some regular season numbers.
All right. He's an old friend. He's a tremendous sports writer. He's put out one of his best, Rocket Men, 3 years in the making. Rocket Men, the black quarterbacks who revolutionized pro football. We thank him for spending some time with us. John, I'll talk to you soon, and good luck with the book.
Well, thanks for having me on, Stan. I've been coming on a long time with you, and it's always a pleasure.
All right. I like to hear that. Thank you. For John Eisenberg, I'm Stan the Fan Charles. Be back next Monday with Ross Grimsley and Luke Jackson. And we'll talk more about the Orioles and their offseason. Bye for now.